Members, we are going to move to file item 40. That's AB 1330 by Mr. Bloom. File item 40, members. On the file, clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1330 by Assemblymember Bloom, an act relating to energy.
Mr. Bloom, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Energy efficiency is the first call of the state's loading order before procurement of renewable energy and conventional power. It's also the cheapest source of power because every megawatt we conserve is one that doesn't need to be purchased later. However, energy conservation, much like water conservation, is also arguably our most overlooked resource. And unlike renewable energy, there is no tangible bar that is currently set for achievement on efficiency. And as a result, energy efficiency, which is largely on the demand side of the meter, has never been meaningfully factored into the state's long-term energy planning process. This bill changes that. AB 1330 sets a conservative but tangible goal for achievement of energy efficiency in the state. That goal is 1.5% of the state's current peak by 2020 and 2% by 2025. This goal is inclusive of what utilities already do in the ratepayer-funded programs, and through those programs, the IOUs cumulatively already achieve 1.5% in load savings. However, the thought here is that a tangible goal creates accountability for those programs, and it also makes those achievements more accountable for the state's long-term planning so that investments in these programs actually result in less power being purchased. Members, this bill will go a long way towards maximizing the already existing $1 billion in ratepayer dollars for energy efficiency programs and sends a strong signal to investors and product developers that the state is committed to this industry and fills a critical role in meeting our emission reduction goals. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Bloom. Seeing no discussion or debate on this item, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Mr. Bloom? Mr. Bloom moves a call. Members, we're going to move back in the file to file item 17. That's AB 80 by Ms. Campos. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 80 by Assemblymember Campos and others, and act relating to state government.
Ms. Campos, you may open.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I present to you AB 80, a bill that seeks to address the racial disparity that limits the success of our California young men of color. When only 13% of Hispanic males and 19% of black males hold a college degree, compared with 30% of white males in California, and California fails to graduate 34.7% of its black youth and 25% of its Latino youth, compared to 12.2% of its white youth. And we know if incarceration rates remain constant, 1 in 3 black males and 1 in 6 Latino males will go to prison during their lifetime, and compared to 1 in 17 white males. AB 80 would establish a 19-member interagency task force to align state agencies to take a coordinated response in meeting the challenges that face our diverse male population. AB 80 would assess existing state agency programs to ensure they are all in line with the priorities to help our young people to succeed with the President's My Brother's Keeper initiative. The bill would assess the governor's budget to identify those areas in which the budget priorities are aligned with the objective of the task force. It is clear that right now we are having silo conversations and meetings and just not able to come to an agreement that will prevent our youth from not being successful. There needs to be a central effort, and this bill will do just that. Our young people and our state's future depends on us being able to move forward for our youth. I would also note that this measure has received bipartisan support and is supported by the Attorney General, Kamala Harris. I respectfully ask for your aye vote. And then a last thought, as we move forward with this bill, I'm hoping that as we look at through the Select Committee on Women of Color and Girls of Color, that we can address some of the same issues so that we are in front of this issue for our women, men, boys, and girls of color. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Campos. Mr. Alejo, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I also rise to support this important bill, AB 80, which creates a state interagency task force on boys and men of color. As a Latino from Watsonville who was not supposed to make it, one of those young persons that as a teenager they called, as they say in Spanish, a travieso, I'm here today as a state legislator because somebody gave me a second chance. By investing in the interagency task force on the status of boys and men of color and giving these individuals a chance, we're investing in our state and bettering our communities. As a member of the Select Committee on Boys and Men of Color and as a joint author of this bill, I believe this task force will further the efforts of our local organizations who are already taking the lead to deal with issues affecting our most diverse and disadvantaged communities. I respectfully ask for an aye vote on this bill.
Mr. Bonta, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise in support of AB 80, which I'm proud to join author as one of the chairs of the Select Committee on the Status of Boys and Men of Color in California. California has taken a lead in addressing the health, wealth, education, and safety outcomes of boys and men of color in many respects, from the ongoing work of social justice organizations, foundations, and community leaders, to the Assembly's own creation of the Select Committee in 2011 by my predecessor in the Assembly, Assemblymember Sandre Swanson. One of the recommendations that came from the original Select Committee was the idea to create an interagency task force to target programs and services for boys and men of color. AB 80 would create that task force and take us one step closer to improving the life outcomes of boys and men of color in our state, ensuring that they live lives animated by justice, opportunity, and equality. I want to thank the author for her leadership on this critical issue. I urge you, I vote.
Thank you, Mr. Bonta. Mr. Williams, you are recognized.
Members, as chair of the API caucus, I rise in strong support of AB 80. This task force will address the racial disparities and systemic barriers that limit the success of California's young men of color. A disproportionate number of Latino, African American, Native American, and Southeast Asian males are trapped in a cycle of poverty, prison, and disadvantage. We must address this issue. And it's not merely a matter of justice and equality, but as these demographics will constitute a majority of the state of California and moving forward, it is essential to improving our economic strength and our competitiveness in the state. I ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Gibson, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As a member of the Legislative Black Caucus, and also someone who grew up in South Central Los Angeles, just like Member Alejo said, I shouldn't be here. And there's a number of individuals in my community that struggles each and every day. I think this is a good sense measure. I support and really thank the author for bringing this measure before us, because I believe there should be a coordinated effort. We also have, again, my brother's keeper, but I don't see enough agencies coordinating to try to have some really tangible and positive results. By this particular measure, I think we get there. And again, thank the author for standing, and I urge my colleagues for an aye vote.
Mr. Patterson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise to support this bill as well. I'm not a member of the particular caucuses who have been, but I have had the joy of watching my middle son, who has taught in a very difficult charter school that has included many, many young men of color. And to watch as some, not all, but some, come to that aha moment when, because of a school that really cares and because these young men are coming with an attitude of change and a desire to make their lives better, wonderful things happen. Unfortunately, there's not enough of an understanding of the challenges that these young men face, and not enough opportunities for those who are just at the moment to make the aha decision, the choice to turn to a path. This particular young man that my son was privileged to teach should not have made it through school and been the valedictorian. All of the pathologies were against him. He would come to school every day, and his sister would take him, and she would be on crack every day. Now, these are the kinds of pathologies that these young men face. We need to be understanding the challenges and doing all that we can. I did have the privilege, and very first time I was in my office, to have a visitation from young black men in Fresno who were doing really wonderful work in raising this issue. And he was sort of standing in the corner. And after all the other young men left, he came up and said, "Are you Mr. Patterson's dad?" And I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "He saved my life." We can do things to save the lives and to raise the lives of young men of color. I hope this is the beginning of a whole lot of moments when we will be blessed with the reality of young men of color saying, "My life has been saved. I've been on a pathway now." In fact, this young man is now serving in Fresno. He is serving, it's called Street Saints, and he's also serving with the EOC. Let's do this times a million, and some wonderful things will happen in the state of California. I ask for your vote. Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Mr. Eduardo Garcia, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker and members, I will be brief. I echo the comments of the distinguished assembly member from the 23rd District. I can tell you that one of the first hearings at the Select Committee of Boys and Men of Color, led by then Chair Sandre Swanson, took place in the city of Coachella. And today we have a robust, comprehensive plan in place to address the issues related to reducing the number of boys of color who end up in the criminal justice pipeline. We also have a comprehensive plan to make sure that we are supporting our after-school programs and integrating the necessary mental health elements to ensure that we're addressing the systemic problems that our boys and men of colors are having in our communities. And so I just rise in support of AB 80 and say that this works. This works because in the city of Coachella, as I mentioned, it is working. And so with that, I want to commend the author of the bill and strongly urge everyone to respectfully vote for this measure.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Mr. Jones Sawyer, you are recognized.
As a joint author of AB 80 and with my assembly member from Oakland, chair of the Select Committee on Boys and Men of Color, I rise in strong support of this legislation. Members, the fastest growing demographic in California are those minority groups with the lowest levels of male educational attainment. These groups comprise the BMOC coalition include Southeast Asians, Pacific Islanders, Latinos, and African American males. Research has shown that if current levels of education and population trends stay consistent, the United States and California will see a decline in educational attainment and quality of life for all residents, not just young men of color. The goal of ensuring the future global competitiveness of the U.S. cannot be met without the full participation of our nation's young men of color. Establishing a permanent government entity that is tasked with finding and, most importantly, implementing solutions to address this crisis can further work to improve the outcomes for some of the most vulnerable citizens. And I might add, I have always said I am unapologetic when it comes to us saving our young men and boys of color. Thank you, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Jones Sawyer. Mr. Linder, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to take a real quick opportunity to really applaud and thank the authors for putting a bill like this together. This one is a very, very personal bill for me because it just hit my life perfectly. When I was growing up, there weren't a lot of role models that looked like me. I mean, that went to college and had high school diploma, college graduates. So, for me personally, in my own community, that's changed a lot since then. I mean, I look around and you see people of all different diverse backgrounds that are doing better and graduating college and becoming more successful. And I look around in this building alone, and I see all the good role models that are there, and it's in part because of programs like this. We need to do everything we can to make sure that our youth, our boys and men of color, are successful and have the tools, and those obstacles that stand in the way are removed. So I really want to applaud you. Thank you. I'm fully in support of this measure. I urge an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Linder. All discussion having ceased on this item, Ms. Compas, you may close if you wish.
Thank you. The only thing I want to say is let AB 80 be a call to action for our boys and men of color in California. Respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Compas. With that, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 69. No, 0. Measure passes. File item 18, pass and retain. File item 19, pass temporarily. Moving to file item 20, that's AB 13. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 13 by Assembly Member Chavez and others, an act relating to public post-secondary education, declaring the urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
Mr. Chavez, you may open.
Thank you. AB 13 is actually the son, or I guess we could call it the daughter, of AB 13 from the 2012 cycle. AB 13 would bring California community colleges in line with federal policy for student using GI Bill educational benefits. AB 13 has received unanimous support throughout the committee process and is supported by various veterans organizations and community colleges across the state. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez. Seeing no discussion or debate on this item, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 70, no 0 on the urgency. Ayes 70, no 0 on the bill. Measure passes. We're going to pass temporarily on item 21. We're also going to pass temporarily on items 22, 23, and 24. We've dispensed with item 25. We are moving to file item 26, members. That is AB 1317 by Mr. Salas. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1317 by Assembly Member Salas and others, an act relating to public post-secondary education.
Mr. Salas, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. AB 1317 would prohibit the UC from increasing compensation for university executives within 2 years of increasing student tuition. With that, I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Seeing no discussion or debate on this item, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 62, no 0. Measure passes. Members, moving to file item 27. That's AB 1396. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1396 by Assemblymember Bonta and others, enacting into public health finance, making appropriation therefore, declaring the urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
We're going to pass temporarily. We're going to pass temporarily on file item 27. We are pass and retain on file item 28. Members, we are moving to file item 29. That's AB 615 by Mr. Rendon. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 615 by Assemblymember Rendon, enacting into water.
Mr. Rendon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. AB 615 creates a small but significant change in law which will tweak a little bit the definition for disadvantaged communities relative to safe drinking water. As you know, safe drinking water is an urban issue. It's a rural issue. Bad drinking water plagues cities throughout the Central Valley, places like Tulare, Salinas, and the city of Maywood, which I represent. There are obviously Proposition 1 funds available for safe drinking water, and this change will make more communities applicable for those funds. I ask for your aye vote for AB 615.
Thank you, Mr. Rendon. Seeing no discussion or debate on this item, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll and tie the vote. Ayes 67, no 0. Measure passes. All right, members, we are moving to file item 31. That's AB 692. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 692 by Assemblymember Quirk, enacting into greenhouse gases.
Mr. Quirk, you may open.
Thank you, Speaker and members. The governor's put forward a bill, an idea that we should reduce our greenhouse gas generations from fuels by 50% by 2030. It's a very hard goal, particularly for heavy-duty vehicles, tractor-trailer trucks and such. One way this could be done is very low-carbon fuels. And there are some now, methanol, biodiesel. However, there aren't enough. What we really need is something like cellulosic ethanol and other things which just are just at best at the pilot plant state. These cannot go forward unless there's a market. The state of California has asked the citizens of California to conserve and to generate fewer greenhouse gases. It is only right that the state put their money where their mouth is, that they, in fact, bear the pain of helping these new technologies, which are going to be more expensive, that they help these new technologies come on the market by supplying the initial purchases. When this is done, we very much hope that cellulosic ethanol or other technologies will be available and that the state will have played a leading role, not by a mandate, but by putting its money where its mouth is. I urge your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Quirk. Seeing no discussion or debate on this item, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll, tie the vote. Ayes 44, noes 24. Measure passes. File item 32, AB 870. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 870 by Assemblymember Cooley, enacting relating to housing, making appropriation therefore.
Mr. Cooley.
Colleagues, good morning. I rise to present AB 870. This bill relates to rapid rehousing as a method to combat homelessness. This is an effort that has been shown in other states. You get people in a stable household environment. They're able to kind of get their life established, reestablished. It actually saves money in the long run because they're not going from hither and there to gather services. They've got a base to operate from. This bill will establish a 2-year pilot to support rapid rehousing programs in 4 counties in the state. A very good bill, and one that has demonstrated that while dealing with homelessness takes resources, some strategies minimize those resources. Rapid rehousing is one of those. I request your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Cooley. Mr. Breaux, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Today I rise in support of AB 870. Rapid rehousing's main focus is to move quickly into stable housing. As someone who served at the Department of Veterans Affairs in the Bush administration, in our office was the National Homeless Veterans Program. There's estimates of up to 25% of homeless persons are veterans. There's a lot of programs out there to help them. Unfortunately, they're not using them. I also served on the Dana Point City Council, where I created a homeless task force, brought in stakeholders on the business side, on the charitable side, Catholic Church, Family Assistance Ministries, to try to help homeless in my city of Dana Point. I'm proud to rise with my colleague from Rancho Cordova and urge your aye vote on this measure.
Thank you, Mr. Breaux. Seeing no additional discussion on this item, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 58, noes 8. Measure passes. Members, I am prepared to lift the call on AB 1330 by Mr. Bloom. The clerk will post. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 43, noes 28. That measure passes. File item 33, AB 20 by Mr. Alejo. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 20 by Assemblymember Alejo, enacting relating to undocumented workers.
Mr. Alejo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise to urge your support for AB 20, an effort to address the critical agricultural worker shortage facing California. This bill will create a California Ag Worker Permit pilot program for workers already residing and working within our state. Every year, California's 81,000 farms grow over half the nation's fruits and vegetables. Yet despite the vital role of agriculture in California's economy, the ongoing labor shortage and drought has farmers wondering if they should invest their limited resources in planting another season of crops. It is well-known fact that California's agriculture industry is heavily dependent on immigrant labor, where it is estimated between 50 to 75% are undocumented. Likewise, California farm workers have contributed greatly to the state's economy, and they live in fear that they will be deported one day and separated from their families. This cycle of need and fear should not persist, and we have a state that should take action in light of the failures of the federal government to pass comprehensive immigration reform. And although work authorization is a federal jurisdiction, a work permit program can meet all the constitutional requirements with a delegation of authority from the federal government. Allowing such a program to take place in the state like California, a state that recognizes the hard work, sacrifice, and contributions by our undocumented agricultural workers. AB 20 will initiate an important conversation that must be had in terms of immigration in our nation. This bill has no opposition, has received bipartisan support in the Labor and Employment Committee and Judiciary and Appropriations, and it has the support of the agriculture industry and mirrors the goals of the bipartisan and Republican-led state Senate resolution this year calling for a comprehensive immigration reform passed by this chamber earlier this year. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Alejo. Mr. Hadley, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise today in support of AB 20. There are provisions in this bill that I do not support, and I would welcome an opportunity to participate in discussions around the bill as it moves to the Senate. But for me, those unattractive provisions pale in comparison to the central problem we are dealing with around immigration policy, which is that we as a country do not have an immigration policy. One thing we have learned in the immigration policy legal battles of the past 10 years is that whether members of this House like it or not, the federal government is responsible for making and enforcing immigration law. So I welcome AB 20 as an attempt to work with, to coax, to prod, to push the federal government toward an immigration policy in at least one urgently needed area, in this instance, agricultural labor. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Mathis, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise in support of AB 20 today, and I would like to thank the author for bringing the bill forward. California's farmers are facing a labor shortage of nearly 25% less workers since 2010. California's farms produce for a global market and are the economical engine of the Central Valley. If and when the federal government steps up to address this issue, this framework will be an important key for creating jobs and helping our economy. I urge an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mathis. Mr. Patterson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Members, and thanks to the author. I want to speak just briefly to the necessity for the permit for agriculture. Yes, we need to make sure that our workers are taken care of and are paid well. The bottom line for our agriculture folks is the uncertainty. So the permit process that is suggested here really does create the opportunity for our agricultural people to have a confidence level that the people that they are hiring do have a permit, and it could very well be an example, because I believe it will work, an example for our federal government to take a look at a permit process for agricultural workers. I thank the author, and I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Seeing no additional discussion on this item, Mr. Alejo, you may close if you wish.
Yeah, just to close, Mr. Speaker and members, this bill is only allowing the Department of the EDD Department and the Department of Food and Agriculture to bring stakeholders together and design a program and engage in discussions with the Department of Homeland Security. Any program that is designed through this bill would then have to come back to this legislature to approve before anything is implemented into law. So it gives you that comfort that it's just allowing us to do the work to design a program. A similar effort was done by a Republican-led legislature in the state of Utah that brought people together, also trying to solve a very serious problem in agriculture in that state. Considering that agriculture is one of our biggest industries in California, we should allow the work to continue and bring back a program that could actually work and set the example for the rest of the nation. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Alejo. With that, clerk will open the roll. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote or desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 59, noes 1. Measure passes.